South Africa in the early 1990s. A nation emerging from a traumatic past into an uncertain future. From the CODESA negotiations in the 1994 elections to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and beyond. Not only was CSVR an eyewitness to these events, but in many cases, we were the driving force behind them. Our story starts in March 1987. At the height of the biggest public service strike in South African history, a group of strikers drove 4 non-strikers to Prolikon, south of Johannesburg. There, they dropped a 31-kilogram rock on their victims' heads and burnt their corpses. At their trial, the State versus CBC, the strikers' defense team included Lloyd Vogelman, a clinical psychologist, prominent anti-apartheid activist and founder CSVR's predecessor, the Project for the Study of Violence. Vogelman was driven by one simple question: why? Why were fundamentally decent people driven to committing such grotesque acts of violence?
It was the CSVR through Lloyd Vogelman and his colleagues that brought to the table a new approach, and that was the role of psychology in legal proceedings and the psychology of mob violence. This led the court to understand and accept that social psychological phenomena such as conformity, de-individuation, obedience to authority and so on, that these things court accepted as extenuating circumstances through this intervention by Lloyd and them.
In the end, the Prolikon accused escaped the death penalty.
There's no doubt they would have gone to their maker had this approach not been introduced to the court, because it just helps people to understand how law-abiding citizens find themselves driven to commit really heinous acts. So I think I can positively say our work does make a difference and does contribute to making society less violent.
Isolated voices like Lloyd's had been telling apartheid's unheard stories for years. As their voices started to rise above the government propaganda, the world started to listen, and our profile went global. PSV evolved to CSVR. Funders donated. Programs and initiatives flourished. In 1995, we came of age when our determination to give a voice to South Africa's voiceless culminated in the establishment of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We played an instrumental role in shaping the TRC model, mobilizing communities to attend hearings and supporting to victims through platforms such as the Kulumani Support Group, a jewel in the CSVR crown. The lessons we learned from South Africa's TRC would prove fundamental to our emergence as an internationally recognized transitional justice pioneer.
I would also say learning from our work during the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, also another achievement, particularly with regard to sharing the lessons we learned with other African countries and beyond who are undertaking transitional justice processes, to learn from what we have learned.
International expansion would come later. First, we had mountains to move at home. By the turn of the millennium, it was clear that exorcising apartheid's legacy would take generations, not years. In response, we adopted a more holistic approach to tackling issues impacting on communities and society. Over time, our work condensed into 3 core strands: advocacy, research, intervention. Our 3-pronged approach shaped our expanding program of initiatives and projects. Crucially, it also gave us a unique insight into the causes and effects of the traumatic episodes such as the xenophobic attacks of 2008 and the Marikana massacre of 2012. Immediately defaulting to our activist roots, we provided rapid hands-on support to the victims of these tragedies while working tirelessly behind the scenes to influence government responses and public policies. In short, we connected research with advocacy and grassroots action to protect the most vulnerable people in society. As we continue to confront challenges at home, our reputation in the rest of Africa went from strength to strength. Our long-standing relationship with the African Union gave us a place at the table where policies designed to consolidate and reinforce transitional justice practices across Africa are forged.
I would say that we have truly shaped the transitional justice agenda in Africa to a larger extent. If you look at where we started with this work of transitional justice during the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, how we use some of the learnings and some of the reflections from that process to inform other processes that followed up immediately after the South African process, such as the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Liberia, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Sierra Leone. We literally took some of the lessons learned and reflections from the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission to ensure that they avoid some of the pitfalls that and some of the gaps that we experienced with the South African TRC. And the aim really was so that they could improve their own national processes by learning from some of what we did right. We speak now of CSVR being present in 23 countries that are currently undertaking their own national transitional justice processes.
Following our work in Liberia, Sierra Leone, Syria, South Sudan, the Gambia, Sudan, Mali, Bangladesh, and more recently, Ukraine, we were now seen as an organization with the credibility and capability to address continental and global challenges.
One concrete example of how CSVR has improved lives is the work that we've done in South Sudan since 2015. At the time of the peace agreement in South Sudan, we discovered that there was only one psychologist in the whole country. Clearly, this was not enough to address the conflict and deal with the healing and provision of mental health and psychosocial support in the country. So we started a project that had us work from the ground up in building this capacity, the mental health and psychosocial support capacity, where we started working with civil society organizations, faith-based organizations, and anyone that we could find in the country who had some bit of experience in providing layman counseling. And almost 7 or 8 years later, we had built this capacity through 48 people that we worked with.
In 2019, we proved our credentials as a transitional justice pioneer when the AU formally adopted the AU Transitional Justice Policy, a defining moment that took almost 10 years to reach.
We've got a lot of big achievements, but I think notably working together with the African Union to develop the African Union Transitional Justice Policy over almost a 10-year period is high up there on the list. It was a difficult process politically, technically, but this policy was adopted by the AU and it really is one of our flagship projects.
35 years on, it often feels as if our work has only just started as the world enters an era of unprecedented instability and turbulence. So, what next?
In the next 35 years, transitional justice has a major role to play in addressing some of the emerging threats that we see globally and even on the African continent. We've started exploring the transformative potential of transitional justice, violent extremism and insurgency, for instance. There are tools in transitional justice, principles, as well as the specific substantive elements of transitional justice that can help us to address the radicalization of youth that causes them to join some of these insurgent groups, address as well the marginalization, as well as the failure to address issues of diversity within societies. So we can learn a lot from transitional justice, particularly as articulated in the African Union Transitional Justice Policy, to untangle some of these complex issues that have now become some form of tangled mess.
Whatever happens next, we believe that robust governance will always be a non-negotiable when it comes to advancing the global peace-building agenda sustainably.
Talking about sustainability, obviously we need to take into account issues of good governance. That's an area we are very proud of. I think we can take scrutiny from anybody on good governance.
Here, our board of directors plays a critical role. It is the constant within the structure. It holds institutional memory and historical background. It shapes strategy and supports operations. Its uncompromising approach to achieving sustainability through impeccable governance is key to realizing our founding vision: peaceful, equal, and violence-free societies.